All right. Hello again, everyone. Hope you all had interesting small group discussions and had an opportunity to network with your fellow conference attendees. I'd love to know what some of the highlights were from your discussions. So if folks can put one or two things that really stood out to them that they'd like to share in the chat, I'd like to read them out to the group. And I think we're having the same issue. Doesn't matter how much time you have, it always feels too short, huh? Which is a good thing because that means people are really engaged and want to talk through, what this practically means for them and their organizations and the community that they serve. So if anyone has some thoughts that they'd like to share, there's some thoughts about law enforcement and law enforcement involvement in domestic violence calls. People appreciate the resource sharing, the difference between rural and urban resources that are available, and just differences in DV for sure. Lack of transportation. And again, and from Chastity, I feel like we were just getting started. That's right. And that's what people should consider this. It is just the beginning, right? So a 30-minute conversation isn't going to be the end of the discussion. It's really just the beginning. So thank you for saying that. That makes me feel really good, actually. um, Great group with a diversity of experiences. Yes, yes, wonderful. Need for crisis fostering for sure. All right, so again, what a great round of small group discussions. It's really exciting to see what people are sharing here. So remember, you can continue these conversations through direct messages, meetups, and of course, tomorrow's virtual coffee hour. So now we're going to invite Lina Cohen from Urban Resource Institute and Christopher Wilson from the ASPCA for their talk on collaborative partnerships supporting survivors of domestic violence and their animals.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lina, and I'm going to be leading this talk with Chris from the ASPCA. Before we go any further, I'm just going to introduce myself. Well, my full name is Lina Cohen. My pronouns are they, them. And I was the coordinator who worked with Elizabeth while she was in shelter. So that video that you saw, I think she mentioned me by name, and every time it's really humbling and very sweet. And so, yeah, that is where I started, but now I am actually the program supervisor of the program that we run, and I'm going to talk about our program, all the services that we offer, and most importantly, I want people to try and think about, how you can help. This is geared a little bit towards service providers, but I don't want you to think that just if you're not a direct service provider, that you can't be helpful and you can't be valuable. Everybody's voices are needed in these conversations to advocate for people who do not have, the ability to always be the loudest voice in the room because they're dealing with trauma, because they're trying to find housing, because things are insane on their end. And we know the discourse that's going on, at least in the United States right now, about migrants, about houseless people, about survivors of domestic violence. They aren't the most thoughtful. And so we want to take a minute to try and get everybody to be thinking about how they can help and actively participate. Chris, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Then I'll get started and then switch over to you whenever the time is right.
Sure. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Yeah, so my name is Christopher Wilson. I'm on the transport and placement. I'm the transport and placement coordinator for the ASPCA, specifically our community engagement team. Before I took this role, I worked at the adoption center as an admissions and placement specialist. And so I'm just going to be talking a little bit about our role after Lina speaks, of what we try to do to keep the pet with the person and make sure everyone's connected and up to date with shots or vaccines or whatever whatever needs to be done with our end. So that's what I'll be talking about next.
Cool. So content warning, we're going to be talking about domestic violence. I'm not going to be super specific, but we are going to talk a little bit about Elizabeth's case. So there'll be a little bit of mention of that situation. If you need to step away, please take care of yourself and do so. And so I want to talk about the program that I am a part of. I work for the Urban Resource Institute, which is the largest provider of shelter in New York City, which also makes it the largest provider of sheltering in the country. Usually, if you're the biggest in New York, you're the biggest in the whole country. And we offer services to homeless folks and to people who are survivors of domestic violence. We are going to be talking specifically about Elizabeth's case, which is a domestic violence case, but there's a huge overlap between survivors and people who are houseless. It's a huge domestic violence is a huge driving force as to why folks are, houseless and in need of these services. And so, yeah, right now I'm going to be talking about kind of Elizabeth's journey into our system. URI is shorthand for for our organization, and the PALS program is the People and Animals Living Safely. That is the program that I'm the supervisor of, and that is a program that helps people with pets specifically. So we are a 10-year-old program right now. 10 years ago, our CEO realized that there was a big gap in services for people with pets. And basically, if you had a pet, your options were be lucky enough to have somebody in your network who could take your pet for a little while, give your pet up, or stay in a dangerous situation because you weren't willing to give up your animal. And we have found that a lot of people are not willing to part with their pets, that it's really tough. And so the PALS program was born. We are spread out throughout 10 different shelters right now in New York City across the 5 boroughs. And we are always expanding because the need is much greater than even what we can serve. And we are a pretty large provider. And so one thing that we're going to be encouraging everyone to do is thinking about how you can help people, how you can create your own programs or support programs that are doing similar work. And so Elizabeth came to us through Safe Horizons. So the first thing I would recommend for everybody in here is, do you know how your shelter system works in your local area? Because I sure didn't when I started this work. I assumed that if you were a person who is experiencing houselessness or domestic violence, that you made one phone call and you were then safely transferred to a safe space. And that was it, the end of the story. It is much more complicated than that and much more challenging than that. There are more people seeking services than there are resources for them. And that is a matter of people the government not having the willpower to focus on this vulnerable population. And so one thing I recommend for everybody is to try and find out what's happening in your area. What would happen if you were in a domestic violence situation and you needed to find shelter tonight? Who do you call? Where do you go? What resources are available? What homeless services are available? And is your government strongly advocating for and supporting these folks? What Elizabeth did is a very common route for a lot of folks. She called the national hotline. So there is a national domestic violence hotline that anyone can call, but there are also local ones for smaller areas. So there's a New York City hotline as well. I'm pretty sure that she was connected to the New York City hotline through the national hotline, and then was connected to one of our shelters. So when she was connected to our shelter, she was just fortunate enough that there was an empty space at that time that could take her, and it was one of our shelters, which is a pet-friendly shelter. In our program, we are focusing on helping folks of all walks of life with pets. It's not just women, it's also men, it's non-binary people. And so I try not to use gendered terms as much as possible for this. But basically, she got into shelter basically the day after she called for support, which is great, wonderful. That is not always the experience for folks. And so I'm really proud and humbled that she got in so quickly and that her story has worked out as beautifully as it has. Then on her second or third day, we actually met face to face, and she told me about BB. Now, my program doesn't support direct service to getting an animal away from an abuser, because that is potentially very dangerous. We're a very small team. And so we do have to work with NYPD in that kind of situation, which is what we recommended Elizabeth do. She went with the NYPD, got an escort to that unsafe location, got the remaining stuff that she had left behind and BB, and came back to shelter. And part of our program is making sure that the financial burden of pet ownership is reduced while in shelter so they can focus on like permanent housing and getting back stable and on their feet. And so we are also fortunate through like grants and other support that we get in the city, and our animal welfare partners like Chris, who will be talking about his stuff very soon. But we got her pet supplies, so litter box, food, bowls, litter, and we do this regularly throughout folks' stay just because it's not easy. And if you've suddenly had to give up everything and you're like frenzy and panicked about where you're going to sleep in a few months because shelter stays are limited as well, then we want them to be able to focus on that final permanent housing situation. BB was a perfect gentleman. I got to meet him. What a cute chub. I wanted to rub his belly so much. I still do every time I see him. And for that first part of Elizabeth's day, she was taken care of. And I'm going to actually shift it over to Chris, because in the beginning of Elizabeth's stay, she ended up getting medical support for BB. And so Chris, you can talk about what kind of support services you offer and any thoughts about how folks can be supportive in their areas.
Sure, great. Thank you for that. Yeah, like Lina was saying, BB got referred to us on January 13th, 2019. We received an email from Lina and just asking us how we could help and how we could assist. And like many referrals we get from URI, this one involved an animal that needed vet care. BB was already neutered, which, yay, that's awesome. But just needed to be updated on vaccines, really. Our client service team reached out to Elizabeth and worked with her to schedule an appointment that was located conveniently close to her. For this particular case, that was all we needed. However, we offer support in many other ways. Like Lena was saying, there's supply support. We can give litter, we can give food, we can give harnesses, we can give leashes, anything like that. When it comes to vet care, though, we have two community clinics, one in the Bronx and one in Brooklyn. And we also have a hospital in Manhattan. Here, pet owners, they can get access to preventative care, such as spay and neuter, vaccines, minor treatments, and there's some other urgent matters like ear infections, eye infections, things like that. They aren't emergency rooms. They are by appointment only, but through reaching out through us, through the community engagement team, we could set up appointments and access free services for them. And then we also, when it comes to vet care, we could do community engagement where we go into the community and bring vaccines, have vaccines events that we provide free of charge. We spread awareness about the ASPCA, network with other providers, and interact with community members. But yeah, for this particular case, it was pretty much just the vaccines that needed to be up to date.
Back to me. Cool. So yeah, Elizabeth actually went through our shelter system in two different ways. So domestic violence shelter in New York City. And I'm an expert in New York City-based sheltering, but I'm not for anywhere outside of New York City, so you'll have to investigate how it works in your area. But we have two different types of domestic violence sheltering for folks. So Elizabeth came in through our emergency shelter, and that's for folks who are in immediate danger, fleeing a situation like, hi, I'm in danger, I need to get out tonight. And that is a limited stay. So she was actually there from May of 2019 to early 2020. So it's about a 6-month stay. By early 2020, she was at our tier 2 location. So it's a different location, which is a transitional housing scenario where basically you have more time to look for housing. Now, in New York, our tier 2 available units are much lower than the amount of people who need it. And so not everybody gets to go through that system. Elizabeth, again, was really lucky in just having that space open up at the right moment for her. There are also a lot of challenges to shelter living. I think Elizabeth spoke on the stigma of living in shelter, and I think there is like a stigma around what shelters are like and what it means for someone to live in them. And so our shelters are all, fully functioning apartment units. For the most part, the units are not shared, and people have their own private space. They offer case management and other things that people can do, like community and group offerings. Um, and my program, the PALS program, is part of a larger branch of URI called the Justice Initiatives, where we focus on other types of supportive services for folks. So we have the rapid rehousing program, which I'm going to talk about in a little while, which helped Elizabeth with her rent for the first year when she moved out. We have economic empowerment teams that try and help people because, you know, when people have been in an abusive situation for a long time, their abusers tend to financially abuse them or make sure that they aren't able to hold a job for a long time. So if they have like a large gap in their resume because they were in an abusive relationship where they weren't allowed to work, we can help them kind of find ways to talk around that in a professional setting or in an interview setting, and also help them like polish up a resume and maybe even connect them with internships so that if they do have a gap, now they have something new. And so considering policies around employment and comfort and making sure that survivors feel safe and are able to get services and get back on their feet is really important for the average person to do. Beyond that, being in shelter, it's a confidential location, like she mentioned, meaning for everybody's safety in the building, nobody's allowed to talk about what the address is. You're not allowed to bring friends over. And that's just because we don't want, you know, folks to start talking about how, oh, there's a domestic violence shelter in this you know, area, and then suddenly an abuser's like, oh, I'm going to go see if my ex-partner is there or my, you know, ex-child is there and see if I can find them and get them back. There's just a lot of like I said, the stigma is really intense for folks feeling like, you know, they're coming in with a lot of trauma. They're coming in, usually domestic violence sheltering is not like the first instance of experiencing violence or any kind of adverse like event in their life, and so folks are dealing with a lot of stuff. While Elizabeth was in shelter with us, she mentioned even in her talk that she did become a little bit depressed, and it was a little noticeable. And so our case management team, we had people who were checking on her. I remember she would mention that there was a particular residential specialist who would come check on her and give her a hug, and how important that was, just that sense of like shared humanity and connectedness. Somebody coming in to say, hey, I care about you. Are you okay? These kind of things really make a difference for folks who have been told up to the point when they're in shelter that they don't matter, that their pet doesn't matter, that their child doesn't matter. These things make a world of difference. Elizabeth also mentioned about how she had like physical injuries from her abuse, and that actually did impact her at her tier 2 location because she had to get surgery. And so sometimes we have to even come up with like small creative solutions. And so normally we don't, you know, you have to be fully self-sufficient to be in shelter, and if not, you have to find supportive housing services, which are slightly different. But for a few months, Elizabeth had back injury that made it that she couldn't bend. And so my team just started to visit her to help her with her litter box, because nobody wants to deal with the grossest, nastiest little litter box situation. We also managed to find a decently priced self-cleaning litter box so that, you know, as she was in recovery and she could bend a little bit, made it easier for her to be able to manage BB's care and making sure that like her unit was clean. And so all these things combined were really important to that healing journey, that specific healing journey. But she's not the only person in our system. I mean, right now we have about 65 families and individuals with pets in spread across our multiple shelters. And the demand is super great. I can't overstress how big the demand is. And one of the service gaps that I find and that I'm always advocating for is that single adults with pets, there are fewer locations for them to go to, fewer support systems for them. And so if that is something that you would be interested in caring about, advocating for, I would love for more voices to be cheerleading this cause and championing this cause, because I feel like in the domestic violence sphere especially, there's a lot of focus on children. Children are actually the largest population of people in the sheltering system. just because if there's an adult or a parent, there's usually multiple children in the family, and so there are more. The children outnumber the adults in the buildings, generally speaking. Um, and I love and care about children. Children are voiceless in this process, so there's a lot of advocacy and care put into advocating and fighting for kids and getting more supports for multiple children families. And that is important and great. But I also want there to be more supports in place for single adults with pets, especially because I find that there's a big overlap in marginalized communities. So there are a lot of queer adults and there are a lot of adults of color who, their pet is their family for whatever reason. They might not have a strong support network with family. Um, and so that's just like a thing that I am very passionate about and always want people to think more about and advocate more for. Um, yeah, Chris, do you want to tag in or do you have more that you want to add?
Yeah, sure. I could just give a little more information.
Yeah.
So like I mentioned, I'm on the community engagement team. We work with pet owners and agencies to identify solutions to keep potentially at-risk animals in their loving homes whenever possible. Here at the ASPCA, we recognize that importance of the human-animal bond. And while our program addresses the need of the animals, we hope that our services are part of a larger network that the pet owner can rely on as an aid to keep their pets with them and to benefit from their physical and mental positivity that the pet brings them. The community engagement program, we also offer case management, which consists of home visits and connecting pet owners to any other services that we have connections to. When it comes to URI Pals, we actually have been partnering with them since 2013. And in that time, we've assisted in more than 15 domestic violence survivor cases per year, and trained more than 100 professionals per year in the field of domestic and gender-based violence. And in that time, the community engagement team has also received 179 domestic violence case referrals, helping the same amount of survivors and 305 of their pets. So it's very important that people reach out to us and we do what we can for sure. Some of those services, like we mentioned, there's supply support, there's vet care, there's transportation if we need it. Our number one goal is to make sure everyone, the pets and the people I like, are all safe, secure, and healthy. And so we just aim to reduce that stress and anxiety involved with domestic violence situations and help ease transitions in any way possible. And this could, take form in referrals. More organizations are becoming aware of the needs to support experiencing domestic violence and their pets. So we provide referrals to organizations for human services or other human animal welfare organizations. And so, when people come to us, we just like to have many resources available, and of course, URI Pals being one of them. Yeah, kind of in mind.
Yeah. I mean, partnership between human and animal welfare services is really essential. I encourage folks in the human service sector to reach out to animal welfare folks, see what the issues are in your area. I learned about my current position from a friend of mine at the ASPCA who is now the director of my program. But we thought about this problem because we worked at the ASPCA and she was the intake director and she saw so many people giving up their pets because of homelessness, because of domestic violence, because of these situations that were like preventable and we wanted to find creative ways to help these folks. And so then we grew into this new position at this new area, but it's been a great background to have that animal welfare background and folks in animal welfare teaching human services about the human animal bond. I think that things are shifting, like the landscape is shifting so that people are understanding that the human animal bond is something and that pets mean something to families, especially going through traumas. But at the same time, there are plenty of folks who don't understand. They might not have had pets themselves, or they might, they're so crisis focused that they're thinking, oh, the pet is something extra. This person is trying not to die today, and so I'm not really worried about a cat. And that is a faulty way of thinking. We have to be a little bit more generous in our thoughts. But having talks with human service providers about why this kind of thing is important, pointing them in the direction of conferences like this that actually show the deep personal impact that pets have on people's healing journeys, super important. Also, I almost forgot, I did want to mention that we helped Elizabeth get emotional support animal documentation, which the ASPCA also has been very helpful with and is able to do at times. I also saw some really good HUVA conversations going on about the ESA letters and discussion about ESAs. And so ESAs are emotional support animals. They are covered under the Fair Housing Act, and are basically an extra level of protection for pet owners. Basically, you have to get documentation from a mental health professional who's licensed saying that your pet is your emotional support animal, and then they're covered under the Fair Housing Act, which means that a housing provider is supposed to try and accommodate that animal as long as it doesn't cause an unnecessary burden on the site. As a person who works in sheltering, I see, all over the place that there are varying issues with that, in that like some housing providers are like, I don't really care about that and we'll find ways around it. I also see mental health professionals who are like, I want to help, but I don't feel comfortable writing a letter because maybe something bad will happen and that will look bad on me and reflect poorly on me. Maybe I'll get sued because a dog breaks something in an apartment. And there is a lot of work that I think that needs to be done in that field. Because that is one of the few ways that people that's an ESA is sometimes the difference between somebody having to give up their pet and getting to keep their pet in a shelter or new housing situation. And so these are things that are really, really important, and is really on my enormously long to-do list, is to find more mental health providers to talk to about this and try and start conversations in that community, because I'm seeing a lot of clients right now whose mental health providers won't write them a letter because they're too nervous, or their supervisor won't approve it because they're too nervous, or a bunch of other things that can be happening. So these are like the basics of our story. I do want to say that I'm so grateful for how things worked out for Elizabeth getting that permanent housing. So grateful that we have a rapid rehousing program. I know that like not everybody watching has such a large organization with all these multi-pronged support services, but there are people who are willing to help in every area. And it is a matter of like making connections and building up programs to try and support as many people as possible. I always say that perfect is the enemy of good. You don't have to create a perfect program. You do not have to create, you're not going to create the ASPCA overnight. The ASPCA has been around for a really long time. URI has been around since the 70s. It's taken us a really long time to become the #1 shelter provider in the country. But, we can't do this alone. Like, even as the largest shelter provider in the country, we can't support every person in the city that needs help. And so we need as many people in the game, advocating, fighting for the rights of people who are having a rough time, who are decent humans, who just want, to have a permanent safe home with all of their loved ones, including their furry, feathered, scaly loved ones. And that's kind of, Christine, I know we want to have a few minutes for questions.
Yes, well, thank you both, Lina and Chris, for shedding some light on this longstanding relationship between a human services provider and an animal welfare organization for the support and success of families that are seeking shelter and safety with their animals. I think it's really a great example of what can be done. But as you said, Lina, perfect is not, perfect can be the enemy of good, or don't let it be, really. And folks should really start somewhere if there is no pre-existing relationship. So we are heading into the Q&A, and people have already started populating the chat with questions and comments, and also the QA box. So I'm just going to jump right in here. There's a lot of conversation around stolen property, and allow me to elaborate. So the question is, do you ever encounter situations where the abuser reports pets fleeing with families as stolen property? That's not something we've encountered yet, but that is something that came to mind when safety planning with our DV pet parents. How do you address that?
Chris might actually have more to say than I do, but I will say that in the history of me working in this program, which is almost 6 years, it has happened very few times. And so we actually ask our owners, like, is it, we don't stress, is this your pet versus this the abuser's pet? But every once in a while, a survivor will tell us it's his dog, and we'll ask what that means. Like, does that actually mean is that true? Like, are you the one who's caring? Who's the primary caregiver? Who's taken the dog to the vet? Who has bought stuff off of Chewy? Because as far as I'm aware, pets are considered like legally property. And so if you can show that you have given most care to this animal, you do have a case. But I also know that people can be really nervous and that can be a really touchy subject, but it has happened once or twice where an abuser has like forced a situation where they try and say that the animal is theirs, or they'll try and use it as an intimidation or like bring a person back into a violent situation tactic. And in that case, it's a very needs-based situation. So, you know, we'll talk to a person and say, is the animal in danger? Like, does this person love that animal? Because the other part of domestic violence is that even the people who harm are human beings, and they're not, nothing is black and white. And they might be an awful person to their partner, but they may actually be a loving person to their pet. So we have that kind of conversation, like, is the animal safe with that person? Is this a fight that you're willing to have? And we'll connect them to resources as is appropriate. Chris, you might have way more to say about it though.
No, honestly, you're right. I mean, it doesn't happen all that much, at least not on our end either. With us, we work with the NYPD when it comes to cases like this. And like you were saying, Lena, if you can provide some sort of documentation, maybe vet bills or something like that, that it's your pet, that's, that could be a strong indication that it's yours. But for the most part, it's the NYPD that will take that over.
All right, thank you. So for URI, do you have limits on the number of do you have limits on the number of pets participants may have? And do you accept all types of animals?
So we accept everything that's legal to own in New York City, which is most animals, but not like certain savanna cats and certain reptiles that are like poisonous. Um, as far as how many animals we accept, so we are a small New York City-based program, and so we accept up to 3 pets per family. And we try really, really hard to be flexible. So if somebody has 10 fish in one tank, that's one fish as far as my brain is concerned. If they have 4 guinea pigs in one cage or carrier situation that they've built, I will still consider that like one. But if they have like 4 German Shepherds or Cane Corsos or Great Danes, that is much, much harder to actually safely fit. In those situations, we talk to folks, and it's also not even just a fitting situation. It's also like, how are you going to move with all of these animals? How, if you end up going to a different shelter, but which happens to a good percentage of our survivors, uh, those systems are not set up to help people with pets at all. And like, so we try and talk to people. Do you have anybody in your network who can take some of these animals? You know, would it be better or safer for you guys right now? And we have a rehoming conversation very solemnly and respectfully, but sometimes that is going to be the best situation for everybody if it's a difference between living on the streets versus living, sheltered. But we respect people where we're at. It just at our program, the max is 3 with an asterisk.
Yes, thank you. That sort of leads into this next question. And I'm sure, and I appreciate, Lena, that the first conversation is like, is there anyone within your network? It's not immediately like, hey, does the ASPCA have cage space at the shelter or something like that? So I think that's an important point too. But this next question is related. How do you best support / address residents with pets on site that may not have the capacity or ability to care for their animals and follow the policies that you have?
So I just want to say first, overwhelmingly, our clients are managing things okay. Um, a big part of the work that we do is mental too. And so when our clients are coming in, um, I feel like whenever there's a new employee or anything like that, you have this vision of what a survivor is supposed to look like. And that is a perfect victim, sometimes a perfect pet owner, a perfect parent, without taking the time to realize that that human being is a person who's been through sometimes really extreme and really extended trauma. Like, if you remember what Elizabeth was saying, she didn't just have an abusive partner, she had an abusive family situation as well. And so these are folks who are living with like years of trauma that they need to work through, and that means that they may not be the perfect parent to their human children or the perfect pet parent either. Um, Overwhelmingly, what I try to do in my practice is come from a compassionate standpoint. So I'm trying to think like, is this animal safe? Yes. Is this animal loved? Overwhelmingly, yes. And so the things that might come up with problems, we try to find creative solutions for it. And so that's the kind of thing where we'll be like, hey, we need to sit down and have a talk. The thing about living in shelter is that even though they're autonomous and they have their own space, they still are kind of a community member in that space. They have to make meetings with their case manager. They have to be looking for housing. If they're not doing these things, somebody's going to talk to them about why, ask questions about why. And a lot of times it's trauma, it's depression, PTSD makes it hard to get out of bed some days, and like that's a real thing. And so when we have pet owners who are doing things imperfectly but not dangerously, dangerously is a different situation. Like animal abuse is a different thing. We call in the ASPCA, we have a very serious conversation. But I've never seen that really. What I see more than anything is like a client who's kind of hoarding because they're so depressed that they can't clean up after themselves, or a client who's so depressed that they're not cleaning up the litter box, or like the food, the area around the bowl is really kind of grody. Those are the situations in which we talk and we say that, like, listen, I know this is really tough, but what can we do to support you? Can we get you more stuff that would help? Can we connect you to mental health support services? Because it seems like you're really overwhelmed right now. Um, those are the kind of supports that people need, and they need to be spoken to like they're human beings and not like they are a cog in the system. It's my conversations with clients, as long as no one is being hurt, is, hey, what's going on? You seem like you're having a hard time and we want to make it better. And we don't want you to feel bad. We don't want your pet to feel bad. How can we kind of work together to fix this or improve this situation? And again, like, if it means that a person isn't walking their dog twice a day, I'm okay with that. Like, we can find wee wee pads. If it means that, like, it takes somebody a little bit longer to make their vet appointments. Our animals, we want them all to get checked out and have all their shots. But if it's like my depression's so bad, I'm having a hard time with that. It's like, how can we make it easier? Can one of my staff members take your animal for you, and we get you support services so that you get to a better place? Like, it's case by case, but it's always about being flexible and like thinking, if I was in this situation, how would I want to be addressed? How would I want to be treated? And always it's like with compassion, like a human being, not yelled at, not talked down to.
Yeah, thanks, Lena. So the answer to this question might predate both of you in your positions at your respective organizations. But yeah, I think when you or I first, when the PALS program first got started, like there weren't dedicated PALS staff. Is that correct?
When PALS first started, correct. When PALS first started, we were at one shelter location and we only accepted cats because this was all human service people and they were very scared of what would happen with dogs. So it was a very different program, and it's taken 10 years to grow. When I started about 6 years ago, we had an average of about 10 clients, like families and individuals with pets at any given time. And since those 6 years, we're now around 60 pretty steadily all the time.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think it's really great, and I think it's a great example that like a human services organization has dedicated staff that can like have these conversations with animal guardians in your program, and it's not like a completely solely burden that the ASPCA has to bear as the animal welfare organization. But I'm wondering, like back when PALS first got started, how much did URI staff lean on the ASPCA to like do all the animal stuff? And like, what's the expectation that should be set up there between human services organizations and animal welfare organizations that want to partner moving forward to create a program like yours?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Partnership is like the key word there. It's working together and trying to come together to understand and set boundaries. So like I would say talk to each other, see what you're capable of. Because if your staff, if neither of your staff has the capacity to do anything, it's not going to work out. But at the same time, if each of you can do component parts, that's fantastic. I know we were leaning on a lot of different animal welfare folks in the beginning. So before I came, I'm pretty sure that we were working with the Mayor's Alliance, and we were working with ASPCA, and I'm pretty sure we were also working with Animal Haven. We were working with a bunch of like small groups because at the same time as I'm overwhelmed because we have way too many people asking for help, the ASPCA is also overwhelmed. We're in the middle of a housing crisis in New York, and we're also in the middle of a pet housing crisis in New York. So I know that we're all like really overwhelmed and doing the best that we can. And so like I think the baby steps is actually sitting down, finding the time, and like making it a priority. So, you know, thinking through what a program can look like. As far as our clients go, like my staff does not do the basic care of the animal. That's like the family's responsibility. And so there is no real animal husbandry or like day-to-day care that we need. And we wouldn't really ask that of the ASPCA because I know they're super busy. But at the same time, we might have somebody, you know, you have to think about like if there's an abandonment shelter, who's going to come and get that animal, which like depending on our team size, like when there's nobody there, we'd absolutely call the ASPCA. At this point, we have a few animal welfare experts on our team who could manage it, but it's all about like what everybody feels like they can safely handle. And Chris, feel free to chime in, man.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And we just, you know, we do whatever we can do to ease the burden on the domestic violence survivor and your iPals, wherever we're working with at the time. You know, a lot of times people in these situations don't have time to gather up food or records for their pets or things like that. So that's where we can come in and kind of expedite the shots, the vaccines, make sure they have paperwork to get into shelters if they need it. And you know, drop off food and things like that. And so it's just important that you just work together. You know, it's a very tough situation. Like Lina was saying, you know, the shelters right now in New York City are just it's overrun. It's so many, and so boarding can be a problem. But we also work with like agencies outside the city to try to get, you know, if the domestic violence survivor doesn't have a place right away where they could take the pet, we could sometimes offer our services to drive the pet somewhere, have it stay for a while, go pick it up, and then reunite with the owner when they do have a safe spot. So yeah, it's just a lot of working together, a lot of communication, and just trying to kind of ease the burden on everyone involved and doing your part.
And being flexible and creative. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. I think that answers the next question, which is how do you help folks safety plan with their pet when shelters, it could be either human or animal when the shelters are full and everyone's sort of at capacity. And it sounds like it's just a very, like you work with the person, is a case by case basis.
It really is. And also like you have to recognize I've seen some comments over Hoover about, you know, needing to move away from saviorism in animal welfare and human services. And that's absolutely true. You have to respect the people who are calling and asking for help, that they're going to figure out a solution for themselves. Because I would say like 95% of the time they do. Like they will figure it out. They are the experts in their life and they are survivors.
Yes.
Like you were saying, just helping people get back on their feet, really, and just like giving them the supplies they need to kind of get going, and you know, that's what we commit.
Excellent. Wonderful. Thank you. Well, let's see here. I think we're just about at time. We are at time. Darn it. Well, lots of good questions we didn't get to. I keep saying that over and over again, and I swear that's that's not scripted.
Feel free to message either of us directly on Hoover. I will check it. We're available via email. I'm pretty sure our emails are on our Hoover things. And Christine, thank you so much for being an amazing host and hosting such a wonderful conference. We love My Dog Is My Home and everything that you guys are doing, and we want to support as much as possible.
Thanks. Thank you both for being here. Thank you both for the work that you're doing and for sharing your knowledge and experiences with us. All right, so now we will be taking a 15-minute break. Please don't forget to keep making use of those coloring sheets in the Artifact Center. You can find it under posters on the Whova app. And I just wanted to show off my creation. Isn't that nice? Isn't that lovely? So don't miss the next session, everyone, which is a special office hour session on the codification of co-sheltering environments with Jackson Galaxy. So see you all in 15 minutes.